American Horror Story has always had a strange talent for taking what's real, our history, our fears, our legends, and twisting them until they turn into something that is too uncanny to shake off. Season 10 double feature took that to another level. Instead of one long storyline, it split itself in two: Red Tide and Death Valley. Two completely different settings and two very, very different aesthetics, yet circling the same ideas of ambition, exploitation, and survival. On the surface, they could not look more different. Red Tide lingers in a foggy New England town, shout out to P-Town, great place, and Death Valley launches us into the middle of the desert. Red Tide looks at the pursuit of creative genius and how that can turn monstrous. And Death Valley gets into alien conspiracies, Cold War paranoia, and government secrecy. As per usual in American Horror Story, this season reflects real-life stories and historical events. The tortured artist trope, the myth of alien encounters, although I don't personally feel like those are myths, but, for lack of a better word. The paranoia of the 1950s, all of these have deep roots in reality. From vampiric activity on foggy shores to secret alien meetings in dusty deserts, we're diving into the stories, whether they be myth or real life, that inspired this season. I have a whole series on this that I've been working on. Just a reminder, this is not a breakdown of the season. This is just a breakdown of the things that inspired the season. And for double feature in particular, you are going to need to acquire some black pills and a tinfoil hat. The Gardner family walks into Provincetown, already carrying that classic artist energy. Hungry for inspiration, but maybe a little too willing to gamble with the cost of chasing it. Harry is the perfect example. He's a writer desperate for his big break, and he's already tuned into the town's strange vibe. Provincetown becomes the perfect stage for ambition and appetite to spiral into violence. Long before the show imagined monsters stalking the streets, a real-life predator named Tony Costa was luring young women into the Truro Woods. The press would dub him the Cape Cod Vampire. Like most predators, Tony Costa did not come out of nowhere. There were warning signs, big flashing neon warning signs. Born on August 2nd, 1944 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Costa committed his first violent offense at 17, when he broke into a girl's apartment and tried dragging her down the stairs. He was convicted of burglary and assault. The consequences for this were a suspended sentence with probation. In 1963, he married a 14-year-old girl and had 3 children with her. The marriage collapsed amid abuse and heavy drug use. He moved to California in 1966, but returned to Massachusetts in the summer of 1968, and went on to steal over $5,000 worth of medical equipment and drugs.
He allegedly broke into Dr. Callis's office in Wellfleet.
And he stole quite a bit of doctor's supplies in drugs.
This right here at the corner is the back door to the emergency room, and then the double doors were when the ambulance could back up into it. But it was through the back window here that Tony broke into. Down this hall, straight ahead was a locked cabinet. It was maybe about 10 feet long, about 3 feet wide, and that's where the medications were locked.
Even more shocking was the fact that several women he associated with during that time went missing or ended up dead, including Sydney Monson, Susan Perry, and Christine Gallant. A week after stealing from the doctor's office, Sydney Monson vanished from her house in Provincetown, and she was reported missing on June 14th. By August, Costa's divorce was finalized and he moved in with Susan Perry. But after only a week together, she vanished on September 10th. Costa insisted that she had gone to Mexico. In late September, he was picked up by police for failing to support his wife and children and remained in custody until November 8th. Once free, he spent time with Christine Gallant, using drugs together until November 23rd, when Gallant was found dead in her bathtub from a barbiturate overdose. That brings us up to the new year, 1969, and the case that earned Tony Costa the title of the Cape Cod Vampire. I was shocked when I started researching this case and found very, very little about it. After hitting several walls when it came to reliable sources, I turned to the law, specifically the Justia U.S. Law Archive of Commonwealth versus Anthony Charles Costa, which summarizes evidence presented during the trial and cleared up the timeline quite a bit for me. Before I get started, just in case it was not obvious, this case gets very, very dark. If mentally you're not in a place to ingest that sort of information, that is totally fine. You handle this in whatever way is healthiest for you, even if it means clicking off the video. On January 24th, 1969, Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki, both 23-year-old friends from Providence, Rhode Island, traveled to Provincetown, Massachusetts for a weekend trip in Walsh's blue Volkswagen. They checked into a local guest house and met a fellow boarder, 24-year-old Tony Costa, who was kind enough to help them carry their luggage. The very next day, Costa left a note on the women's door asking for a ride to nearby Truro that morning. And we know it was left by Costa because it was signed Tony. Around midday, a friend of Costa's sees him riding in a blue Volkswagen, with two young women, presumably Walsh and Wysocki, heading toward Truro. This was the last time Walsh and Wysocki are seen alive. Later that afternoon, the women failed to show up for a planned meetup with another friend. On January 26, 2 days following the women's arrival, the guest house owner discovers a typed note on the women's door stating, quote, "We are checking out. Thank you for your many kindnesses. Signed Marianne and Pat." The note was on the same type of paper as Costa's note from the previous day, which raised suspicions. The two women's personal belongings were gone from their room, and Costa was observed lingering around the property that day. By the very end of January, Walsh and Wysocki are officially reported missing, prompting a police investigation. During the early stages of the missing persons inquiry, Costa aroused suspicion again by asking a local gas station owner how much it would cost to repaint a Volkswagen, quote, "some exotic color," unquote. On February 2nd, 1969, a witness spotted Patricia Walsh's Volkswagen partially hidden about 30 feet inside a wooded area in Truro. Some reports were more specific and said it was an area known as Old Truro Cemetery. That same day, Costa brought two friends to the Truro woods and retrieved the VW, then went on to drive it up to Boston. Side note here, the trip from P-Town to Boston is not a stone's throw away, just in case you're not familiar with New England. It's around 2 hours, sometimes much longer if you hit traffic, and I'm gonna hit you with a surprise here. Boston has been known to have some traffic from time to time. Costa told his friends that the two girls gave him the car and that the women were going to Canada. This was obviously a story meant to explain their absence. While he was in Boston, Costa inquired about obtaining false registration papers and a bill of sale for the vehicle. Also, he mentioned having a .22 caliber pistol buried in the Truro woods. If that seems random, it was because he was offering to sell it. On February 7th, 1969, Costa moved Walsh's VW out of state. He rented a parking space in Burlington, Vermont. Again, this is very far away from Boston and even further from Cape Cod. When he was in Burlington, Vermont, he attempted to register the car in his own name there. The next day, acting on the discovery of the abandoned car, police organize an extensive search of the Truro Woods where Walsh's VW had originally been found. That morning, a search party uncovered a mutilated female body in a shallow grave. The remains were later identified as Susan Perry, a 17-year-old who had been missing since the previous Labor Day. Perry's body had been cut into 8 pieces. Investigators also searched Costa's room at the Provincetown guest house and found personal property belonging to Walsh and Wysocki, further implicating him.
We searched his room, and in the closet we found a lot of rope, which had red stains on it. That got us going. We zeroed in on him as a suspect.
Throughout the rest of February, the search continued. Costa was questioned multiple times in the days following the discovery of Susan Perry, and gave the police 3 conflicting accounts of when he last saw Walsh and Wysocki, and how he came to possess Walsh's car. He also submitted to and failed several polygraph tests, while repeatedly changing his story. On March 3, 1969, a Western Union telegram arrived at Costa's mother's home in Provincetown, supposedly sent by Pat and Marianne. It claimed the girls were alive in New York. Costa's mother turned it over to the police, who quickly determined it was a hoax. The telegram was traced to a phone number accessible to Costa himself, a failed attempt to mislead investigators about the women's whereabouts.
We had another detective went down there to verify the fact. How was the telegram sent? He, Tony Costa, actually sent the telegram to his mother in Provincetown, but it was signed by the 2 girls from Rhode Island.
And the following day, police renewed their search in the Truro Woods and made a grisly discovery.
We were called out to participate in a search. All we were told was to call the attention of anything unusual to the state police who were on the location.
Because we knew this was the area where he used to bring girls.
2 shallow graves were unearthed about 1.5 miles from where Susan Perry's remains were found.
I came across this huge tree, and I saw strands of rope at the base of this tree. I mentioned before, in his closet, in his house, there was a big coil of rope, and it had red marks on it. So when I found this tree and I saw pieces of rope around it, I said, I gotta start getting in the ground. So I started digging underneath it. Come across pill vials and all kinds of drug paraphernalia. Underneath the drug paraphernalia was a plastic bag with the head in it. It was severed.
Authorities found the dismembered remains of Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki buried together in a forest clearing. Autopsies later confirmed both women had been shot. Walsh in the neck, Wysocki in the brain, and their bodies were mutilated after death. Walsh's body was cut in 2 and her chest skin peeled like a sweater. Wysocki's body was cut into 5 pieces and bore extensive stab wounds, including large slashes across her buttocks and chest.
It was like a puzzle. We were missing parts of that puzzle, and that made us to continue digging.
When you see pieces of the body outside and they're taken out and they're set down and their photographs taken, it looks like pieces of something. But when they're put on a white slab in the mortuary and their bodies are cleaned and you look at their faces, you can see the horror in their face. You can see the scream as they're caught just before death. And you don't forget things like that.
I mean, you can bury a body much more easily than you can dismembering and burying a body. Dismemberment takes time and a lot of effort and strength and tools, so the dismemberment had to be significant to him. It can't just have been utilitarian.
A pathologist testified that the mutilation was consistent with necrophilia. And if that wasn't horrific enough, beneath their remains, investigators discovered a 4th victim, the body of 18-year-old Sydney Monzon. As I mentioned earlier, she was a local woman who vanished from the Cape the previous spring. Also, a .22 caliber pistol was recovered, buried near the graves, and ballistics confirmed it to be Costa's firearm. The burial clearing was soon recognized as the same spot where Tony Costa had an illicit marijuana garden, directly tying him to the crime scene. On March 6, 1969, with the crucial evidence in hand, police arrested Tony Costa for the murders. He was formally charged in connection with the killings. When this happened, Provincetown and Truro were suddenly swarmed by reporters, eager to cover what was quickly becoming one of the most shocking cases in Massachusetts history. In that frenzied climate, Costa picked up the nickname that would define him, the Cape Cod Vampire. The label can be traced to a press conference on the very day he was arrested, when the DA, under pressure to explain the gruesome scene, gave reporters disturbing details about the victims. He claimed the women's hearts had been removed, their bodies cut into joints, and even suggested there were human bite marks on the remains.
There are indications that there are teeth marks on parts of these dismembered bodies. We feel that the condition that surrounds these murders would be something which could have continued. The age of the decomposed bodies may go back beyond 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. We don't know what took place during that time, and there are at least 2,000 or 3,000 missing females in the United States, and we don't know how many may be buried in the Truro woods.
Those statements were not accurate, but they were enough to spark imagery of cannibalism and blood drinking. When a reporter asked outright if the crimes could be the work of a Cape Cod vampire, the DA said yes, and the name stuck. In my personal opinion, I feel like this is highly disrespectful to the victims. What happened to them was terrible and gruesome enough. There was no need for this fictional addition to the story. It is absolutely bonkers to imagine a DA, a district attorney, saying, yes, this could have been a vampire on Cape Cod. Insanity. From there, newspapers across New England and beyond really seized on the name, splashing it across headlines alongside other ghoulish nicknames like Cape Cod Casanova and Tony Chop Chop. The problem was, as I mentioned, the vampire imagery was not based in fact. The later investigation showed no evidence of missing hearts, bite marks, or blood consumption. The DA had allegedly misread autopsy reports, confusing incised knife wounds with incisor teeth wounds. What happened to these women was horrific, but Tony Costa was not a literal vampire, if that needed to be clarified. Still, the press ran with the most shocking version of events because it sold papers and fed public fascination. Crowds even began flocking to Truro, some with picnic baskets ready to spend the afternoon trying to see the burial site themselves. The Cape Cod Vampire was more than anything a creation of sensational journalism. A catchy, gruesome moniker born from misinformation that turned Costa into a kind of folk monster. On April 8, 1969, Tony Costa was formally charged with murder. He was indicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder for 3 of the 4 victims. On June 12th, at the arraignment, Costa pled not guilty to the charges related to the deaths of the women. The court ordered further psychiatric evaluation of Costa as his defense began to explore an insanity or diminished capacity strategy, citing his heavy drug use. 1 month later, while awaiting trial, Costa unexpectedly confessed, at least in part. He gave a statement admitting responsibility for Mary Ann Wysocki's murder. He would later alter his story yet again and introduced an interesting accomplice by the name of Corey Devereaux, who he also referred to as Carl. Costa wrote all about this alleged scenario and Corey/Carl in an unpublished manuscript when he was in jail titled Resurrection. Since Resurrection was never published, everything we know about it comes secondhand, from researchers who've seen the manuscript and writers who've written about it. A typescript copy still exists in the Leo Damour papers at Kent State University. Put a pin in Leo Damour. We will expand on him in a bit. Parts of the manuscript have also been described in detail by true crime author Casey Sherman in Helltown, which I did read and I will get to, so put another pin right there. Costa pitched this manuscript as a factual novel, fully convinced it would make him a respected writer, maybe even a bestseller, that would support his kids. Mind you, he did go to jail for, not supporting his kids, but whatever. What he ended up with, though, was a strange 300-page attempt to rewrite his part in the Cape Cod murders. So this is third-hand information, and I apologize for that. But from what I gathered about this manuscript, in Costa's telling, he didn't kill anyone. 2 of the women supposedly overdosed, the other 2 shot by that mysterious friend, Carl/Corey Devereaux. Costa was just the unlucky guy left to clean up, clean up being burying the bodies, cutting them up, and even carrying out one so-called mercy killing to end a victim's suffering. It really does seem like this manuscript swung wildly in tone. On one page, he was waxing poetic about spiritual truth and redemption, casting himself as some kind of seeker of higher meaning. On the next, he's describing dismemberment with this flat, matter-of-fact detachment that makes the whole thing even more unsettling. But the through line of this manuscript is always denial. He painted himself not as a sadistic killer, but as a victim, a reluctant helper, or even a quiet hero trying to stop the so-called real killer. The people who've actually read the manuscript described it as disturbing and delusional, not because it shed light on what happened in Truro, but because it showed just how far Costa was willing to go to reshape his own legacy. Now let's get back to those pins we placed. I mentioned Helltown by Casey Sherman and Leo Damour. I'm going to start with Helltown by Casey Sherman. The author clearly did his research, and I even found this book because I read that he had access to Costa's manuscript, and this was the closest I could get to information from that manuscript. But instead of just telling the story, the author veers off into this made-up dialogue. TLDR, the author of Helltown used the facts of the case, the execution of Costa's crimes, as the core, the truth of the story, and then sort of branched out into more fictionalized aspects. Now on to journalist Leo Damour. Back in 1981, he published a book called In His Garden, The Anatomy of a Murderer, which I also read. This was the first full-length account of Tony Costa's crimes and trial, and Damour's reporting dug deep. He interviewed locals, sifted through court records, and he also got his hands on Costa's jailhouse manuscript. This book has impressive research for sure, but it was equally hard to get through for a very different reason. There was no fluff at all. It was quite repetitive. It was basically like reading through a case file, but it was extremely informative. The books were really helpful when it came to understanding the bigger picture, but let's get back to the case itself, specifically what went down in the trial. Tony Costa's murder trial took place throughout May of 1970. Costa's defense argued insanity, claiming his prolonged drug abuse, LSD, amphetamines, etc., left him unable to appreciate his actions. 4 psychiatrists testified about his mental state. 2 described him as a borderline schizophrenic, further impaired by drug use, while others emphasized the clear premeditation. Costa had left a note, armed himself with a pistol and cutting tools, lured the women into the woods, concealed their bodies and the weapon, and created false trails to mislead investigators. This was already very silly to argue, but the defense fumbled yet again in a huge way when they let Costa deliver a calm, lucid statement to the jury that undercut the insanity plea. He basically gave them a seminar on the dangers of drug use.
He gave a dissertation on the evil of drugs. That was as good as you wanted to hear anywhere. But when he finished, Lieutenant Killen moved over to me and whispered, "It's going to be hard to prove that he's nuts." That's just exactly what Killen said to me, because it showed that he was very rational, was articulate, and I suspect that if I were defending him, I may not have wanted him to make the statement.
On May 29, 1970, after a 3-week trial, the jury found Costa guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the killing of Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki. And that was because prosecutors had focused on those 2 victims' cases. The jury recommended sparing him the death penalty, and the judge sentenced Tony Costa to life imprisonment for each murder. He never faced trial for the other 2 homicides. Charges in those were effectively set aside after the double murder conviction. In 1974, just a few years into serving his time, Costa was found dead in his cell. The nickname Cape Cod Vampire was based off exaggerated claims and media frenzy, but the true story is really just as grim as the nickname itself. Personally, I think Red Tide was more inspired by the legend and not the true story, but regardless, a cold, quiet New England coastal town hit by extreme violence was the perfect backdrop for Red Tide. And getting back to the show itself, I love how the story fuses the vampire angle with that whole tortured artist vibe. It just clicks. For centuries, we have romanticized figures like Hemingway or Poe, who created brilliance through pain, addiction, or self-destruction, sometimes all of it. In the show, that idea is made literal with a black pill. It gives Harry Gardner, Austin Summers, and Belle Noire superhuman productivity at the cost of their humanity. They become consumed by the very drive that made them artists in the first place. I cannot say black pill and not discuss a bit of where black pill comes from, or the idea of the black pill that has its roots in internet culture. The Matrix introduced the red pill as a choice to see hidden truths, but by the 2010s, darker spins on the metaphor appeared online, and suddenly the most annoying person you know is talking about red-pilled, blue-pilled, black-pilled. Specifically, in incel communities, the black pill meant despair and hopelessness. The belief that fate is fixed and nothing you do can change it. Really, it was shorthand for giving up entirely. Over time, the black pill left those spaces and came to mean accepting the bleakest version of reality, whether about politics, climate change, or life in general, just an overall nihilistic view. Red Tide took that cultural weight and made it an incredible metaphor. The black pill in Red Tide either unlocks your genius or reveals you as empty, leaving you a husk driven by bloodlust. It mirrors the online metaphor by asking if destiny is locked in place and whether the cost of chasing greatness is always ruin. The show pushes this further by reframing vampires as artists devoured by ambition. They're not aristocratic monsters, but creators so hungry for success, they consume everything, even themselves. While Red Tide explores the personal sacrifices artists make, it definitely takes aim at the entertainment industry itself as a whole. Hollywood is portrayed as this brutal, exploitative system that chews up hopeful creatives and spits them out without a second thought. So, quite the accurate portrayal, I would say. The black pills become a stand-in for the pressure that's placed on artists to deliver brilliance, a masterpiece, upon demand, or on demand, whatever the wording is, at a very personal cost. In Red Tide, talent is treated like a product. Success is short-lived, and those who can't keep up are simply tossed aside, sometimes literally. It's a harsh take on an industry that celebrates genius but ignores the damage it causes. And I think that the setting reflects that pressure. Provincetown's fog, gray skies, and empty streets create a heavy, haunted atmosphere. The ocean looms as both an escape and a trap. Vast, isolating, and impossible to outrun. At its core, Red Tide is a warning. It asks what success is really worth and what happens when ambition takes over, because sometimes chasing greatness turns you into something you never meant to become. The Death Valley half of Double Feature takes its cues from a web of conspiracy theories that all circle back to one central idea. The US government made contact with aliens. Specifically, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was the one who met with the extraterrestrials. Obviously, aliens is the big inspiration here. There's a lot going on, and a deep dive on extraterrestrials is something that is far too big for me to take on at this point in my life. I wouldn't even know where to begin. So I will be looking at the conspiracy theories connected to the aliens during this chapter of the season. The story goes that after the infamous 1947 Roswell crash and a few other alleged UFO incidents, the US government cut a deal, allowing limited abductions in exchange for advanced technology. In the conspiracy world, this explains the sudden boom in mid-century tech, microchips, stealth aircraft, even early internet infrastructure. The backbone of the season's narrative is the idea that every strange mystery of the last 70 years can be traced back to that handshake with beings from another world. And if you place that theory in its historical context, the timing makes it even more unsettling. This happened during the Cold War, which was an era of secrecy, fear, and extreme paranoia about both Soviet aggression and technological inferiority. The idea of UFOs didn't just represent I cannot say this word, extraterrestrial life. ET life, but the possibility of advanced, super advanced technology, and with it, unknown powers that would be at play that would hold that advanced technology. And that was very scary, understandably. With UFOs already standing in for unknown power, it's not a stretch for Death Valley to suggest other unsolved mysteries were part of the same bargain. And it doesn't just stick to the Cold War timeline. It rewinds to earlier mysteries as well. Case in point, Amelia Earhart. She vanished in 1937, long before Eisenhower's alleged meeting. But the season folds her story into the alien mythos by suggesting she was abducted. In the show, she turns up decades later, not aged a day, looking great, looking moisturized, maybe a few odd things going on in the back area, but other than that, looking pretty good, Amelia. Getting to the real-world inspiration, there are a lot of ideas of what happened to her. The most straightforward explanation is that her plane simply ran out of fuel while crossing the Pacific, crashing somewhere near Howland Island. But that theory has always competed with more sensational alternatives, we'll say. One camp believes she was captured by the Japanese military, accused of being a spy, and executed. And if it wasn't very obvious, that theory was fueled by wartime tensions. Regardless, that idea gained traction when a History Channel documentary in 2017 shared a photograph allegedly of Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan in Japanese custody. Researchers quickly debunked it, proving the photo was published 2 years before she even vanished. Another popular theory claims Earhart lived under a new identity as Irene Bollum, a New Jersey banker, with comparisons made between their photographs. Bollum herself denied it, sued for damages, and historians later confirmed her life was well documented, making the theory implausible. More recently, archaeologists have suggested she may have crash-landed on Niku-Mororo Island. In 1940, skeletal remains, along with artifacts like a woman's shoe sole, a sextant box, and a Benedictine liquor bottle, were discovered under a tree on the remote island. A Fijian doctor, D.W. Hoodless, initially assessed the skeletal remains as male, but modern forensic reanalysis by anthropologist Richard Jantz found the measurements fit Amelia Earhart's size more closely than 99% of individuals in comparison samples. The actual bones have since been lost, which is insane, making direct DNA or anatomical verification impossible. Another conspiracy theory in the show is all about Marilyn Monroe, whose death has always been surrounded by speculation. In real life, conspiracy theories suggest she was silenced because she knew too much about JFK or about classified government projects. Death Valley takes that rumor and cranks it up quite a bit. Monroe isn't just a star caught up in politics, she becomes a casualty of the alien pact. The implication is that the truth was so big, so destabilizing, that the government would do anything to keep it buried, which, could be the real case. Officially, Marilyn Monroe's death in 1962 was ruled as a probable suicide from a barbiturate overdose. The LA County coroner closed the case quickly, and on paper it looked neat and tidy, but that neatness has always raised eyebrows. The official version just feels a little too convenient. Here's what doesn't sit right about the simple overdose. Number one, the timeline was very, very messy. Monroe's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, changed her story about when she raised the alarm, and police weren't called until 4:25 a.m., roughly 30 to 40 minutes after 2 doctors had already pronounced Monroe dead. This odd delay was noted in the LA County District Attorney's 1982 review. Sergeant Jack Clemens later said the scene looked arranged, and that he saw no drinking glass despite the supposed large number of pills. A small discrepancy, but one of the many red flags in the retellings of the case. The forensics also left holes in the story. The autopsy found massive barbiturate levels, but notoriously, later investigators couldn't retest preserved organ samples. Records and materials had gone missing by the time officials re-examined the case. Meanwhile, the FBI's own FOIA files showed that the Bureau tracked Monroe's politically sensitive associations. The 1982 DA review ultimately said there wasn't enough evidence to call it homicide, while still flagging, quote, factual discrepancies, unquote, that keep the doubts alive. Then there's Robert F. Kennedy, RFK himself, and the alleged cleanup. Officially, RFK was in Northern California. Unofficially, multiple lines of reporting say he was in Los Angeles on August 4th and left quietly before dawn. Journalist Anthony Summers, whose research shaped Netflix's The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe: The Unheard Tapes, highly recommend, by the way, it's a great watch, points to interviews and a helicopter log suggesting RFK secretly flew in and out that day after a heated confrontation with Monroe. His takeaway isn't a confirmed murder, but a likely cover-up to erase Kennedy's involvement after her death. That matches what the 1982 DA review and later LA Times investigations concluded. No provable homicide, but a case full of inconsistencies, conflicting timelines, missing evidence, and political pressure that make the official probable suicide hard to take at face value. If you take in all of the information, the official files, the interviews, the missing evidence, it feels very, very sketchy. I don't know exactly what I believe personally, but a political assassination doesn't seem out of the question. I will say I don't believe aliens played any part in that assassination, but I applaud the creativity of the show. Moving on to arguably the most famous conspiracy theory of them all, the moon landing was faked. In Death Valley, President Nixon panics about the space race and turns to Hollywood for help, bringing in none other than Stanley Kubrick to secretly stage the televised moon landing footage. It's a tongue-in-cheek nod to the real conspiracy theory that Kubrick directed the fake broadcast after making 2001: A Space Odyssey, a film that looked so convincing it supposedly proved he could pull it off. The OG version of this theory is that NASA never made it to the moon in 1969. Side note, I cannot talk about this subject, the moon in 1969, without my mind going to that Even Stevens, I think it was a special episode called Influenza. Iconic. That is literally how I learned we went to the moon in 1969 and how I remembered it. Anyway, the theory says that the whole thing, the entire moon landing, was staged on a soundstage to win the space race against the Soviets. This idea caught traction in the 1970s, fueled by inconsistencies people claim to see in photographs and footage, like the way the flag seemed to ripple, the odd lighting angles, or the lack of stars in the sky. While scientists have explained those details, the suspicion stuck, because the thought of a government faking such a monumental achievement just to project power felt a little too believable during the Cold War. Another branch of moon conspiracies doesn't argue that the landing was fake, but that NASA didn't get there on its own. According to this theory, America's sudden leap in space technology was only because of a secret deal with extraterrestrials. In this version, the moon landing is real, but the technology that got us there came from beyond Earth. Some even claim astronauts saw alien structures or ships on the lunar surface, and that information was hidden from the public. It's less about the landing being staged and more about what wasn't shown on the broadcast. Death Valley overall throws in all of the greatest hits of UFO folklore that have been floating around since the mid-20th century. In the show, Area 51 is basically the government's trophy room for alien tech. Reverse-engineered ships, bizarre experiments, all the stuff people have whispered about for decades. It even leans into the cattle mutilation stories where farmers found their livestock drained of blood with these weird, almost surgical cuts. In the American Horror Story version, all those strange events snap together like puzzle pieces, part of one big cover-up running in the background of Cold War America. None of this comes out of nowhere. Area 51 has been at the center of alien rumors since the 50s, when strange lights over the Nevada desert made people think the Roswell crash debris had been stashed there. You add all of this together, and you get this constant paranoia. The idea that the government knew and knows a whole lot more about aliens than it was ever willing to admit, and that regular people were only seeing the scraps slip through. In the Death Valley universe, Amelia Earhart's disappearance, Marilyn Monroe's death, the moon landing, cattle mutilations, and even leaps in computer and military technology all trace back to one handshake between humans and beings from another world. And I would just like to add that these are not the benevolent, curious aliens of classic sci-fi. No. The aliens are not moral entities. They are not interested in our stories. They are not interested in our history, nor are they interested in our struggles. They do not give a shit. We are not even a fly on the grill of their F-150 UFO. They see humanity as a resource, something to be harvested and experimented on. So there's this sense of like cosmic nihilism, the idea that humanity is small, insignificant, and essentially powerless in the face of these much larger forces. It's a pretty bleak idea that I, suffer with greatly.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Existential dread is a frequent topic in my therapy sessions. The aliens in Death Valley definitely aren't the scariest part of the story, although definitely freaked me out on the first watch for sure. The real horror, as per usual, were the humans, and specifically the decisions humans made in those secret rooms. The compromises, the betrayals, and the willingness to turn a blind eye to suffering. It does hit a little bit too close to home right now. At its core, Death Valley is about trust, or lack thereof, in authority figures. The US government is portrayed as a cold, calculating machine, willing to sacrifice its own people for power.
Wait, is this fucking play about us?
This theme resonates deeply in a time when public distrust in institutions feels higher than ever. In many ways, Death Valley isn't about the aliens at all. It's about humanity's ability to justify unspeakable things in the name of progress and power. The aliens are just the lens through which we see those compromises play out. Red Tide and Death Valley might seem like two completely different stories. One about creative ambition in a foggy seaside town, the other about alien conspiracies in the desert. But they share a deeper connection. Both explore the cost of power, whether it's the personal sacrifice for artistic brilliance or the systemic corruption in the pursuit of technological dominance. Both parts of this season show how far people are willing to go and what they're willing to sacrifice to get ahead, often losing their humanity along the way. As a whole, Double Feature reminds us that the real horrors aren't just aliens or monsters. Sometimes they're the choices we make, the systems we uphold, and the lengths we'll go for success.